Thank you. Okay, in opposition.
Good morning. My name is Julie Mitchell. I'm the superintendent of schools in the Roland Unified School District, and the Roland Unified School District respectfully requests a no vote on SB 1432 as proposed. As a district and as a community, we are not opposed to parent choice. However, the district has suffered significant impacts from the District of Choice program, and it has impaired our ability to serve our students. We have relied on the absolute 10% cap as a limit to these impacts, as well as the California Court of Appeals decision, which supported and made certain that absolute 10% cap. SB 1432, as proposed, would negate that legal decision, which created a balance between districts of choice and districts of residence. Our district was forced to initiate this litigation to defend the 10% cap, which was designed to protect smaller districts from the significant fiscal impacts suffered as a result of enrollment loss to outbound transfers. The district student enrollment declined significantly as a direct result of the District of Choice program, which at the time was, there were approximately 2,000 students who transferred to neighboring districts. These 2,000 students represented a loss of 67 staff members, 67 teachers, and approximately $20 million. The result of staff and funding results in a loss of programs for students. The litigation eventually made its way to the California Court of Appeals, where in that case it supported and recognized that the legislator intended the section of the Education Code 48307B to protect districts which already have lost 10% of their average daily attendance pursuant to the District of Choice program. These limitations provide crucial protections for district of residence, which makes certain that no school district may lose more than a fixed percentage of average daily attendance as a result of the District of Choice program, and which are made even more important because the proposed litigation extends the District of Choice program indefinitely as currently proposed. Moreover, these limitations ensure that the appropriate balance between interests of districts of choice and districts of residence are met and guarantee that no school district will face indefinite fiscal or operational instability as a direct result of losing enrollment from the District of Choice program. The repeal of the 10% cap will unravel the district's efforts and will expose the district again to the very forces that caused its hardship just a few short years ago. It is the state funding system that ties students' attendance to necessary funding. Absent a change to the funding system, indefinite and unlimited loss of ADA deeply disadvantages school districts and most directly the students that they serve. SB 432 allows districts of residence to restrict outgoing transfers only when district of residence receive notification from District of Choice. As written, there is no details in terms of that timeline or data. The LAO report has been mentioned, has been brought to the committee this morning, and I too was interviewed as part of that report and had the opportunity to provide input. The LAO report recognizes that program oversight has been limited by a lack of data and flaws in the audit procedures. SB 432 does not address these noted flaws. We are not opposed to choice. Parents have more choice now than ever to enroll their children in schools outside of their attendance boundaries and in other districts when the legislator enacted the District of Choice program and its ancestor statutes in 1993. Inter and intra-district transfers opportunity allow significant parent choice. Although the proposed revisions require the districts of choice to select applications for transfer through a random and unbiased process, that is not the evidence that we are seeing in our district either. The District of Choice, in our school district, we saw a decrease in overall student population, but the typically underserved populations of low income, special education, foster, and English language learners are not being served through the District of Choice program. Through a decrease in our student population, we saw yet a significant increase in percentage of students of great need, where neighboring districts saw an increase in student population, yet a decrease in serving students with special needs. In connection with the proposed indefinite extension of the District of Choice program, SB 432 eliminates crucial oversight mechanisms designed to ensure that the District of Choice program is working in the best interests of the public. In addition to the fiscal consequences, the proposed revisions do little to address other significant and potential social impacts of the program. For example, as found by the Legislative Analyst's Office, Hispanic students transferred at relatively low rates compared with their share of their home district's enrollment, while conversely, white and Asian students transferred at relatively high rates. The need for more information on the social impacts of the District of Choice program and its impact upon pupil demographics and socioeconomic diversity further justifies retaining the sunset provision rather than extending the program indefinitely to ensure that the District of Choice program is not having a disproportionate or disparate impact upon the pupil subgroups. The Roland Unified School District understands the desire for choice, but choice includes the ability to attend a neighborhood school. A proper balance must be made to give due consideration to the impacts of school districts like the Roland Unified School District and the students we serve. We also must point out that there are many mechanisms for choice, and limiting the impacts of the District of Choice program does not undermine its role in choice. Thus, we strongly encourage and urge that the fiscal consequences, the social and programmatic concerns, as well as impact to labor, thus in the consequences of Senate Bill 1432 to school districts be reexamined and the proposed legislation leave intact the absolute cap on outbound transfers and the problematic issues of SB 1432 be addressed. We strongly encourage your no vote today. Thank you.
Thank you very much. In opposition.
Thank you. Good morning, Madam Chair and members. My name is Deborah Deal. I'm from Azusa Unified School District. I'm the Chief Business Official of the district. And we respectfully request your no vote on SB 1432 as currently written for the following reasons. The data presented has not considered the negative impacts of state funding either, a result of hold harmless, of which you may know about. So when districts are like ours, we've lost more than 3,000 kids in the last 12 years. About 1,100 of those kids have been to a district of choice, as my superintendent has already told you previously this morning. When our district continues to decline, then the state pays for that decline for 1 year. That's the hold harmless provision. When these students transfer to another school district of a surrounding district, the state pays that increase on a growing district. So the state will have a significant fiscal impact that I don't think has been considered and fully vetted in this bill. A loss of funding in this case is then backfilled by the state, and the receiving district would also receive funding. We would receive funding, therefore the state pays twice. The lack of accountability and timely enforcement is very loose in this bill, has been very loose over time, and I think that is extremely concerning to the districts that are involved, because at some point the district has to enforce its rights, which incurs legal bills, which incurs time, and by the time you get through the legal process of enforcement, the kids are already enrolled and you're already off with the fiscal year. The point is moot at that time. So it leaves districts in a declining position, very vulnerable. It impacts the ability of declining districts to implement new programs. Like on our school district, we've implemented 2 STEM programs and early college partnerships with our local community college. We think these are important programs and they're bringing kids back, but we can't afford to do both. We can't afford to have a decline and at the same time build new programs to attract kids back to our district, which is what we're trying to do with our local accountability plan. The author acknowledges that there's a lack of oversight, which leads to a lack of enforcement overall. How are we going to go forward with a lack of oversight? Who's going to take care of that and who's going to fund it? These are questions that we have. We do have a higher population of special ed students, higher than the state average. considerably higher over time. And when we look at the data, when we look at the evidence that supports the numbers in our school district, and we've gone back 5 years, we've lost $23 million and growing. We've lost 1,065 kids, and our increase in special ed students is alarming. We are way above the state average in those areas, so that's real data. This bill has not presented any real data in opposition to that, and I thank you.
Thank you. In opposition.
Good morning, Martha Albers, on behalf of the Association of California School Administrators. We actually do not have a position on the bill, so my remarks will be very brief. We have members on both sides of the issue, as we heard today in the testimony. The one consideration that I will bring to your attention that was raised by the opposition that is worth considering is the fiscal implications related to the repeal of the 10% cap. There's a lot of school districts across California that have declining enrollment, and it has serious consequences on the financial side for school districts and their financial stability. So as we will be considering this bill in our policy committee next Tuesday, we may stay neutral on the bill, but just wanted to bring up the attention about the 10% repeal and any fiscal consequences that it might have on school districts that are the districts of residents. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, any other opposition? Any questions from members? Senator Block, Senator Pan?
Yeah, for the author, it wasn't clear to me if you're accepting the amendments that the chair has proposed or not.
Yes and no.
No wonder it wasn't clear. Okay,
Yeah,
explain,
right.
please.
I said I'd discuss it later on. I want to see how the discussion goes on all that.
So it's time.
All right. So currently, let me address some of the things that were said related to the cap, because there's a lot of discussion on the cap. For 22 years, well, that's when the program started. It's been in effect for 22 years. I've extended this. This is the third or fourth time, start to lose track of that. But in 2009, when we extended it, there was some concern at the staff level that the language of the 10% cap was perhaps not as hardwired as it should have been. And so Senator Romero and myself, who were joint authors of the bill, introduced a letter to the Journal clarifying that it was meant to be a rolling cap. A school district litigated, and at the appeals court level, you heard the appeals court judge knew more than what the authors did and said it was a lifetime cap. That was never the intent from the first 22 years to now. But it has been enforced since that time, since the decision. Legislative analyst has recommended we lift the caps. So that's what you have reflected in this bill today, is a lifting of the caps. As I look at it, as I hear the testimony here, I think a 10% cap, as originally intended, as was intended each time that we have brought this forward, makes sense. So it limits the problem with the district of residents that are losing them so that it will never rise over 10%. On the other hand, what has been not in place over the last few years is the ability to refresh that 10%. And so I'm willing to take the committee's amendment, which is a 10% rolling cap. It's not a lifetime cap, but it would be a 10% at any given time, if that clarifies. There was other amendment recommended on extending the sunset by 5 years. I'm willing to work with the chair on that. We've had this in effect for 22 years. We did not have enough data last year. We extended this so we could get the legislative analyst report. I'd love to hear the legislative analysts talk about some of this, because we have heard testimony from both the schools that are benefiting from the transfer. We've heard testimony from the schools that are losing it. And our legislative analyst is nonpartisan, tries to drill down through all this stuff, and that's the report you have in front of you. So the program does work, and parents don't have a whole lot of choice. On the natural, over half of our school districts are in declining enrollment. That's just a fact. So which ones, as they're having to make these tough decisions of closing schools, of closing classrooms, of offering fewer programs, which schools do we want to encourage? And this program allows, 10,000 is not a whole lot of students when you think about it, but it's a lot of students in those areas that are dependent on it. So first of all, just to look, if we terminated this program today, you would throw into chaos, all these schools that are dependent on this and the students and parents. But so public schools have a near monopoly on the education of our students, particularly the least able to afford a private school. As I mentioned before, those that are fortunate enough to not have to have both adults, if there are both adults, maybe it's a single adult, but they don't have the ability to homeschool. So what they're left with is, in some districts, and Roland Unified talked about different types of choice, such as intra-school district, and that's one of the innovations they offered after district of choice with pulling some of their students. That stopped some of the flow up. So who is it that we want to encourage? And this allows a small group of parents that want a different choice for their students to be able to do so. So 22 years of positive experience. We now have some data that says that it's actually helping both the districts that they're leaving and the districts that they're arriving at. You've heard evidence from the school districts that they're going to that they're actually bringing more diversity into their campuses, and that was corroborated by the legislative analysts. So I'm not sure that we need to have a sunset on this program, but I'm willing to work with the chair as this goes forth. And if we're not happy with it, she's not happy with it, after it gets through in the assembly, we'll bring it back here and we'll discuss that and work on it to your satisfaction. So, anything else I missed?
Well, let me just state, I support the program. I support continuing the program. I agree with you. It would be chaos to eliminate the program. At least at this time, after hearing the discussion, I support the program as it is with the 5-year sunset. So I'm curious what the chair and you will decide, and I want to hear that before I can vote yes.
Well, we recommended the 5 years, but as Senator Huff indicated, if the bill moves out of committee today and moves over to the other house, depending upon what they do over there, we'd like to bring the bill, make sure the bill reflects what we have suggested as amendments, if not more. So I'm willing actually to go to 7 years, with making sure that the LAO has an opportunity to really review this program. And the LAO suggested 5 years as a minimum.
If I could just ask a clarification, and I think you said it, I just want to make sure that with an extension of the sunset, right now the bill is without, a sunset. So with an extension of a 5 or 7 year sunset, that there be a legislative analyst report at the end of that, so whoever's making that decision then would once again have some data to look at.
Yes. Yeah. So do we need to delineate 5 or 7 years now? Or do you want to? Yes. All right. Well, let's start with, let closure. Okay, let's start with 5 years. Senator Pan, you had?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I too, like Senator Block, would prefer that the author commit to taking the amendment suggested by the committee for 5 years and 10%. And I do appreciate that you referred to the LAO report. And I appreciate the copy here because I want to quote some pieces of it and hopefully, and as to why I feel that a 5 year, and even though this program has been going on for 22 years, there's apparently still missing information that the LAO has mentioned. So on the part that they do know, the part that I am concerned about is that despite the testimony here, in terms of their data, they note that overall the share of participants, if you don't mind quoting the report, overall the share of participating transfer students qualifying as low income, while it's similar for the average of districts of choice, which is 30%, of course the more important one is where they're coming from. However, it's much smaller than their share for their home district, 66%, and students statewide, 59%. So, when we hear about trying to create advantages for low-income students, what we're seeing is actually disproportionately, the students who are using this program are not the low-income students. It's actually disproportionately the ones that don't qualify as low-income. And when we examined transfer patterns, we found that nearly all students, 94%, transfer to districts with smaller shares of low-income income students in their home district. Now, I think that may be related to resources in the district of choice, but we're not seeing a disproportionate. And then the other part, which I hope that if we're going to do a continued oversight, that the LAO would actually get this data. As requested by legislation authorizing this evaluation, we also tried to obtain information about participation of English learners and students with disabilities. Unfortunately, many districts did not have the information readily available or could not provide the information because in format. So that needs to be fixed because we're talking about it, and despite the fact the program's been here for 22 years, the LAO is not able to get that information. And so I hope that in our next iteration that school districts are required to provide this information so we actually have this data. This is not, the LAO has not been able to get it. And in fact, in my mind, I would say is that we should have a pecking order in terms of who can transfer, starting with children who have IEPs or in special ed, followed by low income, and then if there's any remaining slots, then for other students, perhaps as a way to be sure that that's what the truly priority is, since that's what the testimony is about. Now, I'm not going to ask that as an amendment, but I would say at minimum, we should at least have the data that we need that the LAO said that they cannot get from the school district, that the school districts have to provide this data, and that they would actually get a report on it. So I hope that, so to me, that is a reason why at best 5 years, and school districts have to provide the data so we actually can review it the next iteration that comes around. That's 5 years is a long time. So I hope we can address those things.
Okay.
May I
Senator Huff?
answer a couple of things that were
Sure.
said? So when we've extended this before, some of the schools that were using district of choice were accused of cherry picking students, right? And so we mandated upon them that they not advertise in ways that would bring students that were even seen as cherry picking. And legislative analysts are saying we actually need to talk more about the program, right? And let people know there is a choice there. And before this is all over, I'd like to have, if we can, bring the legislative analysts to come up and talk, because we're talking about their report. They actually interface with the school districts, you know, firsthand. But as far as Walnut Unified and Roland, because those are the two in my district that I'm familiar with, Walnut Unified in all the years has done a lottery once, meaning they had more applications than there were spaces, and then they have to do a lottery so that they randomly choose who comes in. Many reasons why school districts do not declare themselves district of choice, and it only takes board action, is because they're worried about who they're going to get in. They can't say no. And so for every year that Walnut has been exercising this program, we can bring the superintendent up if you want, he's in the audience, but my understanding is there's been a lottery only once. They can't force who applies. They take them all. They have a higher percentage of special needs, a higher percentage of poverty, and than what their native population is. So it's like, you know, how could you increase that number? I don't know, you know, unless they're advertising to the lower, but they were told not to advertise and try to do that. So that becomes a little bit of a catch-22 for them. But I think the important thing is you heard the data of Glendora talking about the diversity they were getting and some of the others. I mean, I think the legislative analysts would probably be best able to dig down into the weeds on this. We agree data is necessary. That's why we called for it back in 2009. Last year, there wasn't any data available. We had to go out. Everybody's kind of waiting for the other person to make the first move. And so it would be helpful to have more information about how it's working or not working. But if we could have the LAO come up and specifically address that, that would be helpful.
Okay, I have one more, I have another member who has a question.
Thank you.
Senator Vidak?
This is a very, very interesting program, and in my part of the world, my part of the state, it's very, very popular, and a lot of the testimony was for it, and I would like, both sides talked about the LAO, and I would like the LAO to come up, maybe with permission,
Sure.
that they could kind of talk about this and the 10% cap, and if this program does need a sunset.
Okay. Mr. LAO, up to you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and good morning, members. Ken Capon with the Legislative Analyst's Office. As you heard in the discussion, earlier last year, the legislature passed legislation that required our office to look at this program and make recommendations to you regarding its future. Appreciate a lot of the discussion here. Just let me know where you'd like to start, and I'll be happy to jump in.
Well, why don't you respond to some of the, well, let's start with some of the amendments that we've we suggested, the committee suggested back to reinstate the cap. And let's do the 5-year suggestion. And then we had some other technical amendments that we suggested too.
Thank you. I will start with the reauthorization period. In our report, we had, I think, settled on a minimum of 5 years for 2 reasons, recognizing first that if the state does want additional data about that program, 5 years is really the minimum amount of time you would need to collect better data than what we have on the table right now. The other reason to go with a longer extension was to give districts a little bit more certainty about the program and a better ability to plan for what types of transfer patterns might be happening. The committee amendment is to have a 5-year reauthorization. That's one reasonable option. It's not the only reasonable option. The legislature could certainly consider a longer extension. I think that the decision will ultimately depend on your comfort level with the evidence you've heard for and against the program and kind of what we've been able to glean in our report. We think the staff analysis is really emphasizing that the state take another look at this program in a few years and maybe request another evaluation. In the past, these evaluations have been tied to this sort of sunset review process where the program is coming up for reauthorization. The legislature could take that approach again, but it wouldn't have to. If the state just wants another review in a few years, that could easily be part of the compromise or agreement on this bill with or without a sunset. It's all really going to depend on, again, your comfort level with what you've heard about the program.
Okay. Do you have questions?
What about the 10% cap?
Sure. So the 10% cap is another provision that dates to the origins of this bill, and it's a little bit unclear to us kind of what exactly it was intending to do just based on the language of the statute. But what we think it was intended to do was ensure, kind of protect or insulate districts from sizable drops in enrollment over a period of several years. Although that may have been the original kind of focus of it, with the most recent interpretation, this really sets a very hard limit on transfers where the program is available to everyone up to a certain point in time, and then it's really unavailable after that. And so in our review, we don't think that's the most well-tailored way to address the concern about disproportionate impacts on certain districts. The state in 2009 added a separate provision that does allow districts to limit transfers if it would notably worsen some severe fiscal distress. And we think that with that provision in place, the 10% cap, the justification really isn't as strong as maybe it was in the past. And we have, I think, other concerns that the cap is really limiting all transfers really without regard to student interest or the quality of the local programs.
How many schools are at the cap, or districts?
We are aware of at least 4. We didn't talk to every district for this program, but we're of at least 4 that have reached the cap and several others that are closing in on it within the next few years. Because it is cumulative, there will be more and more districts reaching it over the next few years.
Senator Pan?
So again, I had actually quoted parts of your own report. So can you perhaps speak to the lack of data we have on English learners, students with disabilities, and students in special ed and so forth, the lack of data there, or your ability to get that data from the school districts?
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. That really was one of the challenges with this report. The legislature has long been interested in data for this program. There have been some data collection requirements as far back as 1993. And unfortunately, it's just something the state has never collected. When we did our review, we actually had to really build a list of participating districts from scratch. We worked a little bit with the Department of Education, but it was a real challenge getting this data. I think one of the challenges with English learners and students with disabilities is that districts sometimes report those in different categories, and defining what is an English learner, which groups of students are you including in that definition might vary by districts. And unfortunately, just talking with different districts, we discovered that there were lots of differences in how they thought about it and the data they reported. So to address that concern, we're suggesting the legislature tasks the state superintendent with collecting that data and giving districts some standardized instructions and reporting templates to use to ensure the state gets that data moving forward.
So that sounds like perhaps an appropriate amendment so that when we have the review to be sure that we can get standardized data from LAO in the next iteration.
It certainly makes sense, but I think that language is in the bill, but that what you just suggested is different from some of us reaction because we have LCFF. I mean, school districts are now getting resources, extra resources, if they have certain categories of students, and they should they should know who these kids are and know how to tell the rest of us who these are because they're getting extra resources. So it doesn't quite make enough sense to me. The connection of the dots is kind of missing here.